At my son's birthday dinner, his girlfriend turned to me and said, "Get out of this house. You don't belong here." My son sat in silence. The woman I fed and trusted threw my phone on the floor when I tried to call for help. I stayed calm. Weeks later, I closed their bank account and served eviction papers. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Get out of here, you useless old hag. As far as I'm concerned, you'll never set foot in this house again. Vanessa's voice cracked like a whip, her face twisted with rage. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady as I met her glare. Try to make me leave, I answered calmly. She lunged, her hand raised, but Daniel stepped in and grabbed her wrists before she could strike me. His silence cut deeper than her words. My own son, mute, frozen, while this woman, this stranger, tore into me as if I were an intruder in my own home. I reached for the phone, desperate to call the police, but Vanessa slapped it out of my hand. The crash echoed against the hardwood floor. "You're not calling anyone. You're just leaving," she shouted, her voice shrill with triumph. I stood there humiliated, trembling with a fury I refused to show. Finally, I turned and walked out. My steps were slow, deliberate, though inside I was collapsing. I could feel her smug eyes burning into my back. The house I had chosen for Daniel, the roof I had secured with my own sacrifices, suddenly felt like foreign ground. Outside, the air was sharp with late autumn chill. My shoulders slumped as I slid behind the wheel of my car. The tears came before I could stop them, blurring the streetlights into smudges of gold. Betrayal carried its own weight, heavier than any suitcase. My son had stood by, saying nothing, while that venomous woman tried to erase me from his life. But beneath the grief, a flame stirred. I was not fragile. I was not weak. I had survived widowhood, raised Daniel alone, and learned to stretch every dollar until it became security, property, stability. I had built a life with my own hands, brick by brick. And now that interloper dared to push me out of what was legally mine. She had no idea who she was dealing with. At home, the silence was suffocating. I collapsed onto my sofa, every muscle trembling from the day's battle. For 2 years, Daniel had lived in that house. For 2 years, I had hoped he would grow into himself, discover ambition, maybe even responsibility. But nothing had changed until Vanessa appeared. I remembered his excited phone call, the strange lift in his voice. "Mom, I need you to meet someone very special." I'd been cautious but secretly hopeful. The night we met at the restaurant, I almost didn't recognize him. Daniel, clean-shaven, dressed sharply, his posture straight, his eyes alive. Across from him sat Vanessa, radiant, confident, magnetic. But behind her smile, I caught a flicker, a shadow that tugged at my memory. "Don't I know you from somewhere, or?" I asked, tilting my head, watching her closely. For the briefest moment, her eyes hardened, then softened again as she laughed lightly. "I used to model in a few commercials. Maybe you saw me on TV." She shifted the conversation away with practiced ease, but the uneasiness lodged in my chest like a splinter. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the changes. Daniel sold his father's old car, the one piece of inheritance he had clung to for years. "It's an investment," he explained, smiling nervously. Vanessa had convinced him to put the money into online ventures, her supposed area of expertise. I bit my tongue, but the memory of her eyes that night haunted me. And now the truth was unavoidable. She had stood in my living room and tried to banish me. She thought she had won. She thought I was powerless. But she had underestimated 73 years of survival, discipline, and love, hardened by loss. I wiped my face and sat up straighter, my resolve crystallizing. This wasn't over. I would not allow a stranger to strip me of my dignity or my home. Vanessa might believe she had planted herself firmly in Daniel's life, but she was about to learn how wrong she was. That night, as the city outside settled into sleep, I lay awake, eyes open to the dark. My mind retraced every decision, every sacrifice that had led to this moment. I had let Daniel live in that house, believing it might give him stability, a place to rebuild. I had never told him it was mine. I had simply handed him the keys and prayed he would grow. Now, as the sting of betrayal throbbed in my chest, I saw clearly. This wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about Daniel's dependence, his failures, his refusal to see the world as it was. But I would not crumble beneath his choices. Not this time. I pressed my palm against the armrest, feeling the strength in my bones return. Vanessa had humiliated me. Daniel had disappointed me. But both had given me something they never intended. Clarity. The house was mine. The money in that joint account was partly mine. My life, my sacrifices, my name, they were mine, and I would reclaim them. Vanessa Blake believed she had silenced me with her screaming. She believed she could erase me from Daniel's life. But tomorrow she would learn that Eleanor Carter was no weak old woman to be dismissed. Tomorrow I would begin the fight. And when it ended, she would wish she had never set foot in my home. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's triumphant smirk as she ordered me out of my own house. My son's silence echoed louder than any scream. By dawn, I was still wide awake, my mind replaying everything. When she first appeared, the subtle ways she began to unravel my world. 2 years earlier, Daniel had been circling the drain of yet another failed venture. He was 35 but seemed suspended somewhere between adolescence and adulthood. Each time his reckless ideas collapsed, I picked up the pieces. When he faced eviction, I made the hardest choice. I asked the tenants of one of my rental properties to leave and handed Daniel the keys. I never told him the house was mine. I let him believe I was simply helping him survive. I wanted him to feel independent, even if it was an illusion. For a while, nothing changed. Daniel drifted, sleeping late, tinkering with half-formed business plans that never took shape. And then one evening, my phone rang with an urgency I hadn't heard from him in years. "Mom," he said, his voice almost buoyant, "I need you to meet someone very special." I arrived at the restaurant skeptical but hopeful. When Daniel stood to greet me, I nearly didn't recognize him. He was well-groomed, hair neatly trimmed, dressed in a pressed shirt that fit him for once. His eyes, usually shadowed with worry or defeat, sparkled with new energy. Beside him sat Vanessa Blake. She was stunning in a way that felt deliberate. Long, dark hair cascading over one shoulder, every gesture polished as if rehearsed. Her smile dazzled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Still, I wanted to believe she was the reason Daniel suddenly seemed alive again. Throughout dinner, she charmed us both, or tried to. She laughed easily at Daniel's stories, leaning in with just the right amount of intimacy. She spoke of her career in digital startups, describing her role as an investor and strategist. Yet something about her voice tugged at my memory. Halfway through the meal, I couldn't resist. "Haven't we met before?" I asked, narrowing my eyes slightly. For a heartbeat, her smile faltered, her eyes flashing something colder before the mask returned. "I used to do modeling," she said lightly. "You've probably seen me in commercials." She redirected the conversation instantly, shifting the spotlight back onto Daniel. Her deflection should have been enough to silence me, but unease curled inside my stomach. I forced a smile, but as I drove home later, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen her face in another context, somewhere darker. The weeks after that dinner confirmed my doubts. Daniel, once sentimental about his father's old car, suddenly sold it. He claimed the money was going into joint projects with Vanessa. He spoke with enthusiasm about their plans, online platforms, investment opportunities, vague promises of rapid growth. Each time I asked for details, Vanessa intercepted with technical jargon, a dazzling smile or a gentle rebuke that I was being old-fashioned. Daniel's energy thrilled me, but it terrified me too. He was so eager to please her, to believe in her vision, that he couldn't see the inconsistencies. I saw the way she guided him, the way her eyes flicked towards him when he hesitated, silently demanding compliance. I tried to remind myself that people change when they fall in love. They become reckless, hopeful, even foolish. But this was more than romance. This was control. Now, sitting on my sofa months later, replaying every detail, I realized how quickly Vanessa had entangled herself in Daniel's life. She hadn't just lifted his spirits, she had taken possession of them. I thought about the house, the bank account, the sacrifices I had made to give Daniel a sense of security. Vanessa had walked into that carefully built foundation like a thief in the night, stripping it bare of trust and dignity. But she underestimated me. I pushed myself up from the sofa and walked to my desk. My hands shook as I pulled out old files and records, evidence of every choice I'd made since Daniel's father passed away. Bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, all reminders of what I had fought to preserve for our family. I stared at the papers, my grief slowly hardening into resolve. Vanessa thought I was a fragile old woman who would bow to her cruelty. She mistook silence for weakness, caution for fear. She was wrong. The memory of her smug smile when she slapped the phone from my hand ignited something primal in me. That woman had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. Daniel might have been blinded by her beauty, but I saw through her shine. She wasn't the first predator I'd faced, and she wouldn't be the last. The difference was simple. I had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The clock ticked toward midnight, but I didn't feel tired anymore. My heart steadied, my spine straightened. Tomorrow I would take the first step to reclaim what was mine. Vanessa Blake thought she had won a battle, but she had unknowingly declared war. The morning after Vanessa's outburst, I marched into the bank with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. My pulse thundered as I laid my ID on the counter with a firmness that startled the young clerk. "I need to close a joint account immediately," I declared. My voice carried the weight of betrayal, fury, and an unshakable will. The clerk blinked, hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, ma'am. Please give me a moment." I watched her fingers tremble over the keyboard, her nervousness feeding my determination. For too long, I had allowed Daniel's failures to become my burdens, his mistakes folded into my sacrifices. No more. I was done letting my son's weakness and Vanessa's manipulation drain what I had built with sweat and grief. Within 2 hours, the account was closed, every cent transferred to one solely in my name. I walked out of that bank, taller, steadier, the morning light glinting off the glass doors like a signal of renewal. But I wasn't finished, not yet. Not. At the mortgage department, I initiated the eviction process for the house Daniel and Vanessa occupied. My pen scratched across the papers with finality, each signature a blade cutting through the fog of humiliation Vanessa had wrapped around me. That house, my house, would no longer shelter their deception. By the time I returned home, the phone had already begun its relentless ringing. Daniel's name lit up the screen again and again, 17 times in less than an hour. I let it ring. For once, he would wait for me. When I finally answered on the 18th call, his voice was frantic. "Mom, what did you do? The bank says our account is empty." "Not empty," I replied, my tone even, steady, almost foreign to my own ears. "Transferred. That money was never a playground for your girlfriend's fantasies. It was part of my retirement, part of your father's legacy. I won't let it vanish into nothing." "You can't do this," he shouted, his panic palpable. "We have bills due. Vanessa's startup doesn't exist," I cut in, sharp as a knife. "And as for what I can or can't do, you'll find the eviction notice pinned to the front door tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear his breathing, shallow, uneven. Finally, he whispered, "Eviction? But this is our home." "No, Daniel, it's my property, legally, fully. I never transferred the deed. I never stopped being the owner. You have 30 days to find somewhere else." My voice softened only slightly. My heart ached at his shock, but I pressed on. This was the moment he needed to face truth without the cushion of my protection. In the background, Vanessa's shrill voice sliced through. "Let me talk to her." The phone rustled, then her venom dripped directly into my ear. "You spiteful old witch, you can't just—" "I just did." My words landed with precision. "And Vanessa, I know your face, I've seen it before. When I remember where and when, you'll wish you had never set foot in my home." I hung up. My hand trembled slightly, but my resolve was firm. For the first time in years, I wasn't merely reacting. I was leading. That night, sleep refused me. Instead, I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the determination carved into my features. Vanessa's face haunted my memory like a shadow just out of reach. I combed through news archives, scanned articles, searched for connections. Somewhere, I knew, the truth about her lay waiting to be uncovered. Each click of the mouse carried me deeper into her past, closer to the moment when instinct would collide with evidence. She was not new to this game. I could feel it in my bones. She had played it before, with other men, other families. She was a predator cloaked in charm, and Daniel was her latest prey. The hum of the night, the ticking of the clock, and the faint rustle of paper became the rhythm of my resolve. I would not rest until I exposed her for what she truly was. Vanessa Blake believed she had destroyed me with her cruelty. She believed my silence meant defeat, but she hadn't silenced me. She had awakened me. And when the truth emerged, it would burn brighter than her lies, scorching everything she thought she controlled. If you've ever been underestimated, you know the fire it lights inside you. That's the fire I carried into battle. Stay with me, because what comes next will show you just how dangerous a determined mother can be. The glow of my computer screen painted the room in pale light as I scrolled through page after page of search results. My eyes ached, but I refused to stop. Vanessa's face hovered in my mind like a phantom, familiar yet slippery, taunting me with the certainty that I had seen her before. Somewhere in some dark corner of memory, her true identity lingered, waiting for me to drag it into the open. Hours stretched into days. I poured coffee into myself like fuel, each cup keeping the flame of determination alive. On the third night, as the rain tapped against the window, the truth finally emerged. My breath caught as I froze on a headline buried in an old local news archive. Local man loses life savings to romance scammer. There she was, Vanessa Blake, except the article named her as Jessica Monroe. My heart pounded as I clicked, my hands trembling. The story was horrifyingly familiar. A middle-aged man, lonely and hopeful, had been charmed by Jessica's beauty and charisma. She convinced him to invest in grand business ventures, siphoned every penny from his accounts, and disappeared without a trace. The article included warnings from police. Jessica, sometimes Vanessa, sometimes other names, had been linked to similar scams across 3 states. She was no entrepreneur. She was a predator, leaving broken men in her wake. I knew it, I whispered, the words sharp with both triumph and dread. Quickly, I printed the article, sliding the pages into a folder. I added more, additional reports under different names, each with the same face. The evidence was undeniable. My stomach churned as I placed bank statements beside the articles. The pattern was identical: large withdrawals, offshore transfers, vanishing funds. She had perfected her method, and Daniel was only her latest victim. I dialed his number immediately, but each call went straight to voicemail. Anxiety pricked at me. I couldn't leave him in the dark, not when the truth was burning so clearly in front of me. Grabbing my coat, I drove straight to the house. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. No one answered my knock. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor across the street, appeared at her gate. Her expression was heavy with concern. "They cleared out last night," she told me quietly. "Packed a van around midnight. Your son looked awful, Eleanor, like he hadn't slept in days." That woman, she was shouting on the phone about flight times. Flight times, my blood ran cold. Vanessa wasn't simply hiding, she was running. She had drained Daniel, squeezed every drop of security from him, and now she was vanishing into the shadows with his trust, his money, his dignity. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and left, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Panic tried to take hold, but I forced myself to breathe. No, I wouldn't allow her to disappear with him. Not this time. The next morning, I walked into the police station clutching the folder I had prepared. Detective Harris listened as I laid everything before him: the articles, the bank records, the deed to the house, the timeline of her manipulation. My voice wavered only once when I spoke of Daniel, how she had isolated him, twisted him, led him away from everyone who loved him. "She's done this before," I insisted, pressing the papers toward him. "She's dangerous. My son may not be in physical danger, but financially, emotionally, he's at risk. He doesn't even realize how deep she's pulled him in." Detective Harris nodded gravely. "You've done excellent work, Mrs. Carter. We can file a fraud report and put out an alert. But you should understand, your son is an adult. If he's traveling with her willingly—" "He doesn't know who she really is," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "Please, he's all I have left." Something in my desperation must have reached him. His eyes softened. "I'll expedite this. We'll involve the fraud division. They've handled cases like this before." Relief swelled through me. though it was fragile, thin as glass. At least now I wasn't fighting alone. As I stepped out of the station, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. Hesitant, I answered. Mom. The voice was broken, ragged. Daniel, I need help, he whispered. My knees nearly buckled. Where are you? Are you safe? Airport hotel, he mumbled. She's gone. Took my wallet, my ID, everything. Said she was getting coffee and never came back. His words dissolved into silence. I gripped the phone tighter, torn between heartbreak and vindication. She had abandoned him, just as I knew she would. Stay where you are, I said firmly. Tell me which airport. Terminal C, and he breathed. International. Hotel next door. You were right, Mom. I should have listened. We'll talk about that later, I told him. Right now, just stay put. I'm coming. I ended the call and immediately rang Detective Harris, updating him on Daniel's location. Then I got in my car, my hands steady on the wheel. My son needed me, not as a shield, not as an enabler, but as the mother who would not abandon him, even when he had abandoned me. Vanessa thought she had escaped, but she had made one mistake too many. She underestimated how far a mother will go to protect her child. And I was only getting started. Mom, I need help. Those 4 words, whispered through the phone, cut deeper than any insult Vanessa had ever hurled at me. My son's voice sounded hollow, broken, stripped of the bravado she had once inflated. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached as I drove toward the airport hotel, the city rushing past in a blur of headlights. When I entered the crowded lobby, I spotted him instantly. Daniel sat hunched in a corner chair, his frame shrunken, shoulders bowed. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights and bitter truths. He looked nothing like the confident man he had tried to present to me months earlier. I didn't rush to embrace him. Instead, I lowered myself into the chair across from his. I wanted him to feel the weight of this moment, to face the reality of what he had allowed into his life. She took everything, he muttered, not lifting his eyes. My wallet, my ID, even the cash I kept hidden. She said she was getting coffee and never came back. His voice cracked, a wounded boy peeking through the facade of a grown man. I forced my expression to remain calm, though my chest burned with fury. And now you understand who she really was. Daniel finally raised his eyes to mine, tears shimmering. How did you know, Mom? How did you see through her when I couldn't? Because I wasn't blinded by what I wanted to see, I answered quietly. I saw her for what she was, not for what she promised. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled with the hum of travelers and the distant echo of rolling suitcases. Then I leaned forward. We need to report your stolen ID. Cancel your credit cards. File fraud alerts immediately. He nodded numbly, and together we spent hours at the police station, his hands shaking as he signed forms, his voice faltering as he described her tactics. Each call to the bank, each report filed, stripped another layer of denial from him. Slowly his shoulders straightened, his gaze grew steadier. He was beginning to see himself again. Not the man Vanessa had molded, but the man still buried beneath. Detective Harris returned with a colleague, Detective Alvarez, who listened intently as Daniel described everything. How Vanessa had isolated him, how she pressured him into investments, how she turned him against me. She's got it down to a science, Alvarez said grimly. You're not her first victim. But your testimony, combined with your mother's evidence, gives us a strong case. We'll put out alerts. When we finally stepped back into the night air, exhaustion pressed against my bones, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. My son walked beside me, his steps uneven but purposeful. I want to help catch her, Daniel said suddenly, his voice steadier than before. Not just for me, for whoever she might target next. Pride flickered in me, tempered by caution. That's commendable, Daniel. But your first priority is rebuilding your own life. I know, he admitted, glancing at me with a raw honesty I hadn't seen in years. And I know I can't just run back to your house and hide. I need to stand on my own feet. The words landed like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For decades I had hoped to hear them, and now, finally, they were real. There's a studio apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage, I told him. It isn't much, but it's a start. I'll take it, he said without hesitation. Then he added softly, and Mom, I'm sorry. Not just about her, about everything, about depending on you, taking advantage. I touched his arm, my throat tightening. We'll have time for all of that. Right now, let's focus on making sure Vanessa can't do this to anyone else. As I drove him to Mrs. Henderson's, the silence in the car was different this time. Not strained, but reflective. He stared out the window, his face illuminated by passing lights. No longer filled with denial, but with something new. Resolve. That night, long after I returned home, I sat in the quiet of my living room. The exhaustion of the day pressed down on me, but so did a fierce clarity. Vanessa had believed she could break me, strip me of dignity, drive a wedge between mother and son. Instead, she had awakened the very bond she sought to destroy. She thought she was clever, running off with money and illusions. But what she left behind was stronger than anything she could ever steal. If you've ever seen someone try to shatter your family and fail, you know the strength it gives you. Stay with me, because the battle with Vanessa Blake was far from over, and the next move would change everything. The following days blurred into a steady rhythm of rebuilding. Daniel moved into the small apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage, carrying nothing but the few belongings Vanessa hadn't stripped from him. His shame was visible in the slope of his shoulders, but so was something else. An ember of determination I had rarely seen in him. We met with Detective Harris and Detective Alvarez again. The folder of evidence I had assembled now sat open across the desk, its pages mixed with Daniel's testimony. He spoke haltingly at first, his voice tight with self-reproach, but soon his words flowed with clarity. He described how Vanessa had isolated him from friends and family, how she convinced him to view my love as control, how she demanded unquestioned loyalty while emptying his accounts. Detective Alvarez listened intently, his jaw tightening. She's calculated, but you've given us a map of her methods. That, combined with your mother's documentation, is invaluable. We'll circulate her aliases to fraud divisions in other states. She won't stay hidden for long. Daniel exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. For the first time, he wasn't shielding Vanessa or making excuses. He was facing the truth head-on. When we stepped out of the precinct into the crisp air, Daniel turned to me. She always said you were holding me back, that you wanted me dependent on you, and I believed her. The words cut, but I steadied myself. Did you believe it, or did you want to believe it? He fell silent, his eyes darting away. At last, he admitted, maybe both. It was easier to blame you than admit I was failing on my own. My heart tightened, but I didn't rush to comfort him. This reckoning was his to endure. Growth required the sting of truth. At Mrs. Henderson's garage, the apartment was modest, bare walls, creaky floors, the faint smell of old wood. But Daniel looked around with an unexpected glimmer of pride. It's small, he said, but it's mine. I nodded. That's all that matters. That night, I brought him a box of essentials, dishes, blankets, a few groceries. As I set them down, I noticed something in his demeanor, a flicker of independence, fragile but real. He didn't beg to move back in with me. He didn't ask for money. Instead, he stood there, awkward but determined, and said, "Thank you, but I'll take it from here." Later, as I drove home under the glow of street lamps, pride and sorrow tangled in my chest. For so long, I had carried him, thinking my protection was love. But now, perhaps for the first time, he was standing on his own trembling legs. Still, the shadow of Vanessa lingered. Her face haunted me each time I closed my eyes, her smirk taunting, her absence dangerous. I knew she was still out there, likely plotting her next move, likely hunting for her next victim. And Daniel's wounds, though fresh, could easily be reopened if she ever returned. One evening, as I organized my papers, Daniel arrived at my door. His clothes were still worn, but he looked cleaner, sharper, like a man trying to reclaim himself. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded tightly together. "I've been thinking," he began, "about Dad, about how you managed everything after he died. You never fell apart, even when you had every reason to. And I wasted years leaning on you instead of learning from you." Emotion rose in my throat, but I held it back, letting him speak. She fooled me because I wanted to be fooled. I wanted to believe I was finally building something, but it was just her using me. And I let her. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for all of it. I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. What matters is that you see clearly now. We can't undo the past, Daniel, but we can decide who we are tomorrow. For the first time, he met my gaze without shame. Then tomorrow, I'll be better. It wasn't a grand promise, but it was real. In the weeks that followed, he began looking for work, small jobs at first, stocking shelves, delivering packages. Each paycheck, no matter how modest, added to his sense of pride. He called banks, credit card companies, and insurance agencies, taking responsibility for debts that had once seemed impossible to face. His shoulders began to square, his steps more confident. Meanwhile, I kept working with the detectives, adding new clippings, saving every email, every report. Vanessa's trail was scattered, but the net was tightening, and I knew with a certainty as sharp as steel that she would not escape forever. One evening, as Daniel walked me out of his apartment after dinner, he said something that stayed with me. She took my money, my pride, almost my future, but she didn't take you, and she didn't take the chance for me to finally grow up. I smiled, the cool night air brushing against us. Then she failed in the one thing that mattered most. Vanessa Blake had thought she could break us, but she had underestimated the bond between a mother and her son. She had mistaken dependency for weakness, love for control. What she had actually done was force Daniel to face himself and me to let him, and that was a battle she could never win. When Vanessa Blake walked into the courtroom in shackles, the air shifted. She was no longer the dazzling woman who had charmed my son and tried to erase me from his life. Her hair was tied back, her jumpsuit stiff and colorless, her face stripped of glamour. For the first time, she looked small, smaller than the damage she had inflicted, smaller than the strength she had awakened in both of us. I sat in the front row beside Daniel, our hands resting on our laps but close enough to touch. The prosecutor spoke first, outlining Vanessa's crimes, her string of victims, the evidence collected. Each word was a blade slicing away the illusion she had built. But it wasn't until the judge called for victim impact statements that the true reckoning began. An elderly man rose first, his voice trembling as he described how she had stolen his retirement and left him alone in despair. Then a woman in her 40s, explaining how trust itself had been shattered. Their words cut deep, echoes of what Daniel and I had endured. When Daniel's name was called, he stood. My heart surged with both fear and pride as I watched him walk to the podium. His voice, once uncertain, rang clear in the hushed chamber. She didn't just steal my money, he began. She tried to steal my relationship with the one person who has always stood by me, my mother. She convinced me that love was control, that wisdom was interference. She twisted my view of the very person who raised me, all so she could use me. Vanessa's mask slipped just for a moment. I saw her lips tighten, her eyes flicker. But here's what she didn't count on, Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength. She didn't expect that the woman she dismissed as a meddling old lady would be the one to expose her. She didn't expect that I would stand here today, not as her victim, but as a man who finally sees the truth. She thought she was destroying me, but instead, she set me free. When he finished and returned to his seat, I squeezed his hand, my chest aching with pride. He had finally spoken as the man I always believed he could be. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, the weight of my 73 years balanced by the fire still burning inside me. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I stand here not only as Daniel Carter's mother, but as a woman who has lived long enough to recognize predators. Vanessa Blake targeted my son because she saw vulnerability. She targeted me because she believed age makes us weak. She thought 73 years meant surrender. She was wrong. And the courtroom fell silent as I turned my eyes toward her. She met my gaze, but I didn't flinch. She underestimated me, I continued. She mistook my silence for weakness, my patience for ignorance, my love for control. But what she didn't realize is that love, real love, doesn't fade under pressure. It sharpens, it strengthens, and it fights back. I drew a slow breath before finishing. I don't stand here asking for vengeance. I stand here asking for protection. For other families, other sons and daughters who might fall prey to someone like her. Let this sentence reflect not only her crimes but the danger she poses if left unchecked. I stepped down, my hands trembling, but my spirit unshaken. Daniel whispered as I sat beside him, "That was incredible, Mom." The judge reviewed the plea agreement and handed down the sentence. 8 years in federal prison, restitution to victims, and a permanent restraining order. Justice at last. As Vanessa was escorted past us, she paused just long enough to let her eyes lock with mine. Her voice was quiet but sharp. I almost had him completely. I stood, lifting my chin. "Almost doesn't count," I said firmly, "and he was never yours to have." She turned away and the officers let her out. Daniel and I walked into the winter sunlight, the courthouse doors closing behind us. For the first time in years, we both stood taller, our shadows stretching forward instead of clinging behind. Vanessa thought she could break us. Instead, she became the catalyst for his rebirth and for my reclamation of strength. If you've ever been told you're too old, too weak, or too insignificant, remember this. Resilience is the sharpest weapon you can carry. Stay with me, because what came after the trial wasn't just justice. It was the start of a new life neither of us had ever imagined. The months following the trial unfolded like a season of slow healing. Winter melted into spring, and with each passing day, the grip of Vanessa's shadow loosened from our lives. Daniel, once hollowed by shame, began to show signs of steady growth. He started with small steps. The job at the bookstore was modest, but it gave him structure. He arrived early, stayed late, and took pride in the orderliness of shelves and the rhythm of balancing the register. His manager soon trusted him with more responsibility, and when the title of assistant manager was offered, Daniel accepted it with a pride that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, his apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage transformed from a refuge into a home. At first, the walls were bare, but slowly they filled with second-hand furniture, photographs, and books he had bought with his own earnings. It wasn't much, but it was his, and that mattered more than any illusion Vanessa had sold him. For me, the change came in quieter ways. For decades, I had lived for Daniel, holding my breath with every mistake, pouring my energy into protecting him from himself. But now, with him taking responsibility, I felt space opening inside me. Room for my own life. I joined a local hiking group, walked trails I had once only dreamed of, and discovered the joy of my legs carrying me over ridges and into valleys where the air felt clean again. I signed up for watercolor classes at the community center, the soft sweep of paint across paper reminding me that creation could bloom even after loss. And I planned a trip to the coast, something I had postponed year after year, always telling myself Daniel needed me more than I needed the sea. For the first time, I chose myself. One crisp morning, Daniel and I stood together on the front lawn of the house that had once been the stage for my greatest humiliation. A for sale sign leaned in the soft earth, the real estate agent's clipboard ready. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Absolutely," I said, my tone firm. "This house has served its purpose. It's time to let it go." Despite professional cleaning, the room still echoed with Vanessa's presence, her venom clinging to the walls. Selling the property wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. By releasing the house, I was releasing the weight of what had happened inside it. Daniel studied the structure, his expression softened by memory. For a while, this place felt like everything I wanted. My own home, independence, a beautiful girlfriend. He smiled ruefully. Now I can see it for what it really was, an illusion. "Not all of it," I corrected gently. "Your desire for independence was real. It was just built on a false foundation." He nodded, and together we signed the papers that would free us both from its shadow. In the months that followed, Daniel created new traditions. Every Saturday, he cooked dinner for me. At first, his meals were clumsy, burned chicken, undercooked pasta, but over time, he grew more confident. The night he served roast with vegetables and warm homemade bread, I marveled at the man standing in my kitchen. Focused, steady, no longer hiding behind excuses. I caught myself staring and he laughed softly. "You're staring, Mom." "Just admiring the view," I said with a smile. It's not every day a mother gets to see her son flourish. His expression grew thoughtful. "I keep thinking about that day, when she threw you out. I keep wondering why I didn't stop her. Pain flickered in his eyes, and I refused to dismiss it with platitudes. Instead, I asked, "Why do you think you didn't?" He leaned against the counter, considering. I think I was terrified of losing her. She convinced me she was my only chance at happiness, that being a real man meant separating from you. I thought standing by her meant I was finally strong. But I was wrong. Real independence doesn't mean cutting people off. It means building relationships from a place of strength, not weakness. His words struck deep. For years, I had prayed for him to see the difference between dependence and maturity. And now he was saying it himself. "That's remarkably self-aware, Daniel," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Therapy helps, so does the support group." One guy said something that stuck with me. True strength isn't shown by who you push away, but by who you're strong enough to keep close. Tears stung my eyes and I blinked them away. We were no longer trapped in the cycle of enabling and dependence. We were building something new, a bond forged not from weakness, but from mutual respect. That night, as we clinked glasses across the dinner table, Daniel raised his in a toast. "To fresh starts," he said, "and to the strongest woman I know, who never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself." My heart swelled. I lifted my glass. "To fresh starts," I echoed, "and to the man you've become." For the first time in years, I felt not just relief, but peace. The storm Vanessa brought into our lives had nearly destroyed us. But in its wake, something new had bloomed, a strength neither of us had known we carried. The years that followed unfolded with a quiet grace I had once thought impossible. Daniel grew into his independence step by step, building a life not borrowed from anyone else but carved by his own hands. The bookstore job became a stepping stone. Soon he managed an entire branch, his voice steady, his decisions respected. Where once he had wavered, now he carried himself with purpose. I watched from a distance, not as a rescuer, but as a witness. It was his life now, and he was finally living it. Then came the day he introduced me to Emily. She was nothing like Vanessa. Her smile was warm without calculation, her eyes clear, her laughter unforced. She worked as a nurse, and the tenderness in her nature radiated from the moment she shook my hand. I saw immediately that she wasn't there to mold him or control him. She simply stood beside him. Their relationship unfolded naturally, free from illusions. Emily saw Daniel's scars and didn't turn away. Instead, she held his hand as he spoke of his mistakes, and she reminded him that brokenness didn't erase worth. 2 years later, I sat in the front row of a sunlit chapel, watching my son wait at the altar. He looked handsome, composed, a man ready for the vows he was about to take. When Emily walked down the aisle, her gown shimmering in the morning light, tears blurred my vision. Not from fear, not from loss, but from a peace I had never imagined I would feel again. When they exchanged rings, Daniel's voice was firm, steady. "I promise to love you, to honor you, and to build a life with you that is real." His words carried weight because they were forged in pain, born from lessons too costly to forget. The reception was filled with laughter and music, but the moment that pierced my heart came when Daniel raised his glass. "To my mother," he said, his voice breaking, "the woman who never gave up on me, even when I was blind." This day wouldn't exist without her strength. All eyes turned to me, and for once I didn't shrink from the attention. I lifted my glass in return, my heart swelling with gratitude. Life continued to surprise me in ways I never expected. On my 75th birthday, Daniel and Emily threw a gathering at the community center. Friends, neighbors, and family filled the room with warmth. Halfway through the evening, Daniel called me to the front. "Mom," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "this town has a tradition of honoring those who've made a lasting difference. Tonight, it's your turn." The mayor stepped forward, presenting me with a plaque. "For unwavering resilience. For the strength to protect not only your family, but the community around you." Applause filled the hall, but all I could do was hold back tears. For so long, I had lived in silence, bearing burdens alone. To stand there now, celebrated not just as Daniel's mother, but as a woman who had fought and endured, that was a gift beyond measure. Later that night, as the party quieted and I sat surrounded by flowers and laughter, Daniel came to sit beside me. "Do you ever think about her?" he asked softly. Vanessa, I replied, my voice calm. Not anymore. She doesn't deserve the space. He nodded. I used to hate myself for letting her in, but now I see she wasn't the end of me. She was the start of the man I am today. I touched his cheek, pride swelling within me. That's what survival does, Daniel. It doesn't just save us, it shapes us. The years that Vanessa tried to steal had instead become the years where we found ourselves. She had thought she could break us, but instead, she became the reason we grew stronger. As I walked home under the stars that evening, the night air cool against my skin, I realized something profound. Life had not ended with betrayal. It had begun again, with truth, with resilience, with love that endured. To anyone listening, know this. No storm lasts forever. No betrayal defines you unless you let it. Strength is not found in avoiding pain, but in rising after it. And when you rise, you discover the most powerful truth of all, that nothing and no one can erase who you are. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs reminding that resilience can outlast cruelty, and love can rebuild what deceit tries to destroy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep following, because stories of survival and rebirth remind us all of the power we carry within.